Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra Daf Ayin Tet. Today's daf is sponsored by the Hadran Zoom family in loving memory of the beloved mother of their dear Hadran learner and friend, Rona Fink. Millie Laxer Malka Bat Sarah Avraham Zichronah Lebracha, who passed away yesterday. May her family be comforted among Avelei Tzion B'Yerushalayim. We're going to get started with continuation of this sugya of Agadatot. I'll just make two short announcements. One is starting next Friday, we're going to take a break from Zoom from next Friday till Rosh Hashanah. I will be away, which leads me to say I'll be in Riverdale. So if anyone, I'll be there for Shabbat speaking, the Shabbat of September 21st. So if anybody's in town there, wants to come hear me speak or knows people there and wants to pass it around, let us know. I'll send you the flyer and would love to see people there. And then the other relevant factor is that since I'll be away the whole week before Rosh Hashanah, we'll post all the dapim for the week of Rosh Hashanah on Sunday. And that way people can get a head start and learn. And the Zoom will continue starting Sunday after Rosh Hashanah. So that will also make it easier if you want to learn in advance. Okay, second announcement is, speaking of Rosh Hashanah, the Masala Rosh Hashanah is taken off. It's starting on Sunday, so the registration's open. Lots of people have registered. Come join, 10 days, 10 dapim, and you'll get all the dapim, or the main dapim, anyway, all the dapim in Masechet Rosh Hashanah that relate to the holiday. You'll get a good review of them, so recommended to join and invite others to join as well. Okay, with that, we'll get started. So we had a Mishnah. Let's just review the Mishnah because we're going to go over different parts of the Mishnah today. But now we discussed the differences. We said it's talking about a case where we said a pregnant cow, a pregnant female donkey, and then we said what's the difference, because the cow, at least you could say it's for the milk, whereas for the donkey, can't use its milk, and therefore it must be meant for the foal. Now the Gemara went off on a tangent about this siach and about how it goes after Sichana'ah, and then it brought these drashot about people who leave the ways of God, they're easily strayed, and we got there into tzaddikim versus rishaim, which we'll finish that up right now, and then we'll go back to the main sugya, which is what is included in a sale. So the next part of the Mishnah, I'll just read now, and then when we get there, we won't have to review it, which is machar ashpa machar zivla. If you sell a dunghill where they used to kind of collect the dung, then the zevel, the dung that's there, the fertilizer, which is now really fertilizer, is included in that sale. If you sell a boar, it includes the water. The pit includes the water. If you sell a beehive, it includes the dvorim, the bees. And if you sell the shabbat, it includes the dovecote. It includes the doves that are in it. Or we'll see exactly what this means. But basically, that's what, right? That you can assume the sale includes all those things. Okay, what we're going to do today is get off on a total tangent, which seems somewhat related, but in the world of Hekdesh, and then only at the very end are we going to relate this to our Mishnah, like really, really the end of the daf. So we're going to start on line 3, because we finished up to there yesterday. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Kol haporesh midivrei Torah, eish ochalto. So now talking about people who are leaving the ways of God, straying from the ways of God, anyone who leaves from divrei Torah, kind of, I guess was learning and then decides to leave Torah learning behind, will be swallowed up by it, or eaten up by it, consumed by a fire. Shene'emal, where do we get this? It says, V'natati et panai bahem. This is a pasuk in Yechezkel. God will turn his face to this person in a negative way. Me'ha'esh yatzau va'esh tochlein. This person left from the fire and will be consumed by fire. Now, fire is often, the words of Torah are compared to fire. So what this means is you left the fire, which is the words of Torah, and now you will be destroyed by fire. Ki'ata Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yonatan, Rabbi Dimi came and said in the name of Rabbi Yonatan, Kol haporesh atzmo midivrei Torah nofel begehenom. Okay, this could be kind of similar thing, because Eish often is like the fire of Gehenom. Here, anyone who separates himself or herself from divrei Torah will fall into Gehenom, shene'emal. Adam to'em miderech haskel. Now we're quoting psukim from Mishlei. The first pasuk is, a person strays from the ways of wisdom or knowledge, which is Torah. Bikhal rifaim yanuach. He will end up resting in a community of rifaim. Now, what is rifaim? Well, we'll prove it from a different pasuk in Mishlei, totally different chapter. Ein rifaim ela gehenom. Rifaim means gehenom, hell. Shene'emar, or if you translate gehenom as hell, but some sort of like that. Shene'emar v'lo yada ki rifaim sham. Now, in this pasuk, it says that there's a parallel between Rifa'im and Sha'ol. Okay, Rifa'im, when you have these psukim with their poetic psukim, what's said in the first part is meaning it's the same idea as the second. The Sha'ol is the depths, which is kind of, the idea of hell is like going down into the depths. And Rifa'im is the parallel word there in that verse. So there you have it. Rifa'im is Gehenom. Now getting back to our sugya, but not really yet. Our sugya really talks about this concept. I sold you something, which includes something else. Is that item included in the sale or not? So the Mishna says it is included. So now the question is going to be, what if we take that and we talk about the same idea, but in the world of hekdesh, in the world of consecrating? I consecrate an item like a boar. Does it include the water? And on what does it depend? So the Mishnah here in Meila is going to first talk about 3 categories of hekdesh, which is totally not relevant for the rest of everything we're going to do today. This is just setting up the types of hekdesh there could be. Okay, there's 3 ways or 3 types of things you can sanctify. One is something that's going to go on the altar, like an animal. Could be water for the water libation. It could be wine for the wine libations. It could be wood to go on the altar for burning. Okay, those are all items that could be brought on the altar. Okay, it could be an animal, it could be a bird, it could be a meal offering. All those are things that go on the altar. Then we have items that can be used for the upkeep of the temple, which could be wood for building. It could be gold or silver for making vessels, utensils it could be all sorts of things that are used in the actual day-to-day of the temple that are needed for various things. And then there's things that can be used for either. And if I consecrate it, what does it mean? It means that I'm going to give its value. That's what we call kedusha, right? Damim, the value of that item I'm giving to the temple. Like often for whatever reason, I don't know why I say that. I usually use it as an example because it's like something that you obviously can't bring to the temple, but you say I'm going to sanctify a couch. Okay, so a couch, what does that have to do with the temple? I mean, you might say they need seating space, but no, they didn't have couches or anything in the temple. So what are you going to do with a couch, right? You just mean I'm going to give the value of this couch, or we've had the value of a field, all sorts of things. You can't bring the field to the temple. So the Mishnah is in the Meila. Okay, now what's Meila? Meila is when you accidentally misuse consecrated property. You didn't realize it was consecrated. You accidentally use it. You have to pay the value of the item plus an extra fifth. And you have to bring a korban asham, a guilt offering called the asham me'ilot. So if we say there's me'ila, the word's going to be mo'alim bahem. Okay, that means if you use it, you will be liable for me'ila. That basically means it's consecrated. So the Mishnah here lists in order of severity, the most consecrated or the most sanctified item is an item you consecrated for use on the altar, like an animal, a bird, anything that can go on the altar. If it's ra'oi lemizbech, it can go on the altar, but not lebedek habayit. Okay, but you can't use it for upkeep of the temple. Okay, an animal. Okay, even though maybe a sukkah wall, we talked about using an animal, but you can't really use an animal to build a wall on the temple or something like that. But it's ra'oi lemizbech or lebedek habayit v'lo lemizbech, where you could have something that's used for upkeep of the temple, but not for the altar. Or like gold or silver, or lo lemizbech below the bedek habayit, or it could be neither. Now the point of the Mishnah here, and that's why this isn't really so important for our purposes, it doesn't matter which one. All of these are the same, and the Rashbam even says it's in the order, we call it a lo zo af zo katan. Not only this, which is high level sanctity, and even this one, which is a little bit lower level, and even the one that's not actually sanctified by its body isn't just its value. Now, what does it happen? What happens, by the way, with something that's sanctified its value? Let's say I take my couch. So what happens? It means that until I redeem it and bring the money to the temple, the couch is consecrated. Once I take the money and I bring it to the temple instead of the couch, then the couch is back to normal. Okay. So we're talking about in the stage before I redeem it. So basically, we say the following. All those things, we're just at the beginning of our sentence. We haven't gotten anywhere yet. All those things, mo'alim bahem u'masha b'tochan. Now, if they include something else, like a boar and its water, a dung pile with the dung, all that, if I sanctify it, then it includes whatever's in it. Okay, and we're going to have examples in a minute. Ketzad. Right now, we're going to have the examples. Higdish bor malei amayim. If you sanctified a pit and it was full of water at the time you sanctified it, so all the water is going to be consecrated as well, even though the water, right, doesn't, again, these are going to be different categories. What's the water? The Rashbam helps us out and goes through all these things, which categories they fall into. You would have expected, the Mishnah likes to give you categories and then say, this is category 1, this is category 2. Here they just give you a long list and you have to figure out which falls into which. Okay, the bor and the water actually can't be used for anything. It's just their value, because they say water that was collected in a pit can't be used to go on the altar. And if you're talking about water that maybe they use to wash off the meat and the sacrifices, well, you can only use water that comes from this channel that goes right into the azara. So that's not either. Ashpo meleot zevel, for sure, the dung pile and the dung can't be used in the temple and can't go on the altar. That's right, an unpleasant thing. Shovach male yonim, okay, the yonim can go on the altar because you bring sacrifices with doves. The shovach can't. Okay, they say, the Rashbam says you can't even use it for bedek habayit. You might think take it apart, but it's worth too much. Nobody would do that. Like, you wouldn't take it apart. If you sanctify that, we assume, or you consecrate it, we assume what you meant is for its value, because we don't expect you to take it apart and take the wood to the temple and use it there. Sadem le'asavim, neither nor, right? It doesn't work for anything. And ilan nasoi perot, okay, also a tree with perot, it could be the tree, could be for bedek habayit. Some people say no, it's more like the shavach. You're not going to cut a fruit tree in order to bring it, right? You'll cut a non-fruit tree. And the perot, even though you can bring them for bikurim, those don't go on the altar. So that's really for the kohanim to eat. So it's neither nor. Okay. The main point is we have these items, okay, a bor, a shavach, an ashpa, a sadeh, and an ilan. And all those things have something else in it. If you consecrated them when they were full of whatever item we're talking about, then molim bahem umasha b'tocham. Both the object, even though I didn't say bor with water, I just said bor, but it includes the water, right? This is like our Mishnah. I sell a bor, it includes the water. I didn't sell the, right? Ava, hikdish bor va'achar kach nitmale mayim. But if I consecrated a pit and it was empty, and later it gets filled with water, or ashpa va'achar kach nitmala zevel, or a dung pile which was empty, and only later it got filled after I consecrated it, shovach va'achar kach nitmale yonim, the dovecote which was empty at the time I consecrated it, and later it ended up with doves in it, or ilan va'achar kach nasa perot, sadeh va'achar kach nitmala asavim, you get the idea, right? The tree which didn't have fruits at the time, the field that didn't have crops at the time, and only later it did. Then we're going to have a machloket. Moalim bahem ve'en moalim b'masha b'tochan tivrei Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda says there's Meila here, but there's no Meila for what is inside them. Okay, we're going to basically say the bor is sanctified, but not the water. Okay, the field is sanctified, not the grass, because that wasn't in existence at the time that I consecrated it. That's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosi partially disagrees. Okay, by the way, I mentioned in class, there's a study guide today. Okay, it's in the chat if you're in the Zoom. Maybe someone can put it up again so anyone who came late can open it. Maybe I'll open it soon and we'll look through it. We don't need it just yet, but it does start from the beginning of the sugya, and then we'll open it when I think it's more necessary. Rabbi Yosi omer, hamakdish et hasadeh ve'et ha'ilan, moalim bahem ubegidulehen, mipnei shehen gidulei hekdesh. If you consecrate, though, a field or a tree, according to Rabbi Yosi, anything that grows is growing from something that's already consecrated. So any growth that comes now, water doesn't grow from a bor, right? Dung pile doesn't grow from the dung. The dung doesn't grow from the dung pile. The dung gets put there from the outside. So Rabbi Yosi doesn't disagree in that case, but he does disagree in the case where it grows from the item that was consecrated. So a field is getting nutrient, right? The crops are getting nutrients from the ground, which is already consecrated. So therefore, in that case, I disagree, particularly on those two issues, because it grows from the consecrated item, and therefore it's hekdesh also. That's the machloket. This is going to be more significant later. Right now, we have I would say, a parenthetical sugya. we're going to have a little bit of an issue on this Mishnah, on this machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosi, specifically based on a braita. We're going to see this braita seems to not match what our Mishnah, what again, not our Mishnah, but the Mishnah we just quoted in Meila says. And then in order to resolve it, we're going to bring one possible solution, which from the get-go they know is not going to work. It's going to be introduced with the v'chitema. And if you want to say, this isn't going to work, then we're going to bring a response, an answer that's going to work. And that is going to, it's not going to change the Mishnah at all. They're going to just reread the braita. So that's why it's a totally parenthetical sugya, because it's not going to change where we are in the flow. We have this machloka Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, we understand it in a particular way. We're going to raise issue with it from a braita, but resolve it by rereading the braita, and the Mishnah is going to stay exactly as it was originally. So it's not going to change anything really, but it is a sugya that's here. We're going to learn it. So I want to just keep you with the flow. In the end, we're going to still understand the machloka Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Yehuda the way we understood it right now, even though we'll suggest that maybe there's a problem with that understanding. So again, the main thing to know about this machloket right now is we're talking about items that were empty at the time, that it was consecrated, and Rabbi Yosi only disagrees about the sadeh and the ilan, not about the other cases. But now we have a braita, Tanya, Amal Rebbi. Okay, Rebbi is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Nir'im divrei Rabbi Yehuda, not Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. This is Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Eli. He's the one who's always Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah. Nir'im divrei Rabbi Yehuda bebor v'shovach. I would tend to agree with Rabbi Yehuda on the issue of the bor and the shovach and say what's inside is not consecrated. But I would agree with Divrei Rabbi Yosi b'sadeh ilan. But I would agree with Rabbi Yosi about the sadeh and ilan. Now, what's the problem here? Well, the Gemara is going to say, "Hi, my, what does this mean?" Bishlama, I get the idea. Nirim Divrei Rabbi Yehuda bebor v'shovach. Michlal de pliga sadeh ilan. I get that we're saying I would hold like Rabbi Yehuda on the bor and the shovach. Why? Because he wants to say, but I don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda on the sadeh ilan. In other words, you can infer from here, that's the word michlal, you can infer from here de palig a sadeh ilan, that he disagrees also about the sadeh ilan. In other words, I'm going to agree with Rabbi Yehuda that what's in it is not consecrated, but only in the bor and shavach, meaning, and not in the sadeh ilan. Okay, even though there's more cases like the ashpa, and they're just going to talk about bor shavach versus sadeh and ilan. For some reason, they just ignore the dung, but the dung obviously goes with the shavach and the bor. But that's just a side point. Now, ela, but the problem with the line is the next line. Nir'im divrei Rabbi Yosi b'sadeh ilan. I would tend to agree with Rabbi Yosi on the sadeh ilan, which sounds like, but I don't agree with him about the bor and the shovach. Right now. Michlal de palig bebor v'shavach. What do you mean you don't agree with him? If you agree with Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosi agrees with Rabbi Yehuda, then you agree with Rabbi Yosi. So why are you saying I would only hold by Rabbi Yosi's position on the sadeh ilan, sounding like I don't agree with him about the bor and the shavach, but he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda about the bor v'shavach? There is no machloket. So this doesn't make any sense. In other words, just I'll put it in one sentence, the fact that Rabbi Yosi only disagrees in the case of sadeh ilan, on the field and the tree, doesn't match what Rebbi says, because the words of Rebbi seem to imply that they disagree in both cases. They disagree across all cases. They disagree across the board because Rebbi is saying, the wording of our braita anyway says, Rebbi agrees with Rabbi Yosi only on this issue, which sounds like Rabbi Yosi disagrees on the whole thing and Rebbi just decides to go with him on one issue. So, right? The Rabbi Yosi sadeh ilan kama, right? How could you say that they're plige bebor v'shavach, or Rabbi Yosi disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda on everything, when it says in our Mishnah, again, the Mishnah Meila, that he only disagrees on the sadeh ilan. So, first attempt, which, like I said, we're going to reject. V'chitema, if you want to say, lidvarav de Rabbi Yehuda kamar. Now, this happens a lot where we say, really, Rabbi Yosi disagrees on the whole thing. But when he said the sadeh ilan should be consecrated, what he means is, right, the crops in the sadeh ilan that were not grown at the time, but grew later, what he really means is according to Rabbi Yehuda. So let's read it, right? Or actually they don't say it, but let's explain what he means. So Rabbi Yehuda says, none of them are consecrated. And Rabbi Yosi says, I think all are consecrated, but at least according to you, who doesn't think so, at least admit that in the sadeh and in the field and the tree, of course it'll be, even according to you, because of the gidule karkish. That's a reasonable explanation. The problem is there's another braita which makes it very clear that that's not the case, which really supports our reading in the Mishnah. There's a braita that says, which is going to lead us back to, how do we read this braita of Rebbi? I'm a Rabbi Yosi. Ein ani ro'eh divarav shel Rabbi Yehuda b'sadeh v'ilan. I don't agree with Rabbi Yehuda on the sadeh v'ilan, mipnei shehem kidulei hekdesh. Well, it sounds pretty clear here that b'sadeh v'ilan hu de'ino ro'eh. Right? He says, I don't agree with Rabbi Yehuda specifically in sadeh v'ilan. It doesn't say across the board. So it's very hard to say that, right? Habibor b'shavach ro'eh. It's clearly implied from this braita that on the bor and shavach he would agree with Rabbi Yehuda, which puts us back to square one. How did Rebbi say, I hold like Rabbi Yosi on this? Sounding like he disagrees on everything. And I only hold with him on half the cases. To which they now, so that was the first attempt, which didn't work, where we thought maybe the braita is right, and really he disagrees on everything, the first braita of Rebbi, but proving from another braita, we said, can't be. So now they're going to answer Hachi Kamar, and this will work. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda li Rabbi Yosi bebor v'shovach. What Rebbi really meant to say is not I would hold like Rabbi Yehuda in the bor and shovach, but what he meant to say is Rabbi Yosi even holds like Rabbi Yehuda on the bor v'shovach, which matches exactly what we wanted to say. Sha'af Rabbi Yosi lo nechlak alav ela b'sadeh v'ilan abal bebor v'shovach modele, and that's what Rabbi Yehuda was trying to say. That's what Rebbi was trying to say. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was trying to say. That Rabbi Yehuda says it across the board. Rabbi Yosi agrees with him on the bor and shovach, not I agree with him. Rabbi Yosi agrees with him, but not on the sadeh v'ilan. And that makes sense perfectly with the Mishnah, and we can move on. So that, as I said, was parenthetical. That's not really important to the continuation of the sugya. Now we're going to quote a braita, and I'll share my screen right now. We're going to quote a braita, which says similar. It sort of sounds similar. The topic is similar, but it's going to confuse us a little bit. So Tanu Rabbanan, Hikdishan Rekam. Now notice here, there's no subject. It doesn't say Sadeh, Ilan, Bor, Shavach. Doesn't say what it is. And that's why if you see here in the highlighted sections, Raba is going to have the first girsa where he's going to say it must be talking about Sadeh Ilan. Abai is going to say can't possibly be because of the continuation of the braita, which makes no sense if you say Sadeh Ilan. In which case, we're going to say it must be Raba said, specifically, we're talking about a bor and a shovach, okay? So it's not, the subject is missing here. And that's what we're going to have to try to figure out, okay? Then we'll have some difficulty, which we'll resolve. But basically, we're going to end up with the second version that this really has to do with a bor and a shovach and not a sadeh v'ilan, okay? But that's just the outside. Let's read it inside. Hikdishan rekanin. So you consecrated something while it was empty. V'achar kach nitmalu, and then it filled up. Mo'alim b'hem ve'em mo'alim b'masha b'tochan. So again, this matches what we saw before, that there's Meila, right? But not what's in them, just the object, not what grew later, okay? Or was put in later. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon omer, ach mo'alim b'masha b'tochan. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says, no, even what's in it. Now, this sounds like, if you had to ask me, right, at first glance, it sounds like the exact same machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosi, because, right, that was their machloket. What if hikdish bor and then it was filled with water? One says there's meila, but not what's inside, right? There's meila on the bor, not the water. And Rabbi Yosi says there's meila on the, right, well, he said specifically, if it's a sedan ilan, then the tree and the fruits, right? And that's why we're going to see that originally Raba is going to say it must be machloket sadeh v'ilan, and it matches perfectly with Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosi. Okay, and that's what we're going to see right now. Amar Raba machloket b'sadeh v'ilan. The Tanakama savar like Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon savar like Rabbi Yosi. That sounds very simple. Okay, so their machloket is specifically in sadeh v'ilan, same thing we saw before. Aval bebor v'shovach divrei hakol mo'alim behem ve'em mo'alim b'masha b'tochan. So everyone would agree, though, just like we just proved Tanakama and Rabbi Yosi, that if it's a bor that didn't have water and then it has water, of course the water isn't consecrated. It's only in something that grows from the ground. And because it gets nutrients from the ground, which was hekdesh, it itself becomes hekdesh. And that's Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon's position, like Rabbi Yosi. Tanakama says, no, even in a tree, even in a field, it's not. That works very nicely. What's the problem? The problem is the next part of that braita, okay? Amar le Abaye. Abaye says, Raba can't possibly say this because Elahaditanya, as it says in a braita, which is the continuation of that braita, Hikdishan mileim, okay, which is the reverse case. By our Mishnah was the first case. Here it's the second case. If you consecrate them now, let's just, before we read it inside, if it's a tree or a field and you consecrate it when it already has crops growing, when it has fruits growing, obviously, according to everything we saw now, Ma'alim bahem u'masha b'tochan, right? That seems very clear. Well, let's look at this braita. Hikdishan mileim Ma'alim bahem u'masha b'tochan. Perfect. But Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon machlif. Okay, this is super confusing because what did Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon say? Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon in the first case said, even if it was empty at the time, whatever was in it is going to be consecrated of what comes later. Of course, in this case, if when you consecrate it was already full, of course it's going to be Meila. But here it says Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon machlif. He says the opposite, meaning the stuff that grows later or that comes in later is not consecrated. And Ibis Sadevi Ilan, I'm now turning to Amud Bet. If we're talking about a field and a tree, Amai Machlif, it would be crazy for Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon to all of a sudden say, right, first of all, if we said the whole logic of Rabbi Yosi is it grows from something that's consecrated, well, if it was already there when you consecrated it, all the more so it'll be hekdesh. I mean, in general, even if we say bor v'shovach, we're going to have to explain this, but for sure it doesn't make any sense in a sadevi ilan. So we have to change Raba because it can't possibly be. Therefore, Ela Amar Raba, as I already told you before, he's going to now switch and say machloket bebor v'shovach. The machloket is in a pit and a dovecote. Aval b'sadevi ilan divrei hakol mo'alim behem u'b'masha b'tochan. Okay, but if it was a sadeh ilan, everyone would agree now. Everyone would line up like who? Like Rabbi Yosi, right? In the sadevi ilan, both the Tanakama and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon in this braita specifically, right, where it said Hikdishan rekanim v'achar kach nitbalu or Hikdishan meleim and whatever, we're going to get to that. Okay, we don't understand anything yet right now, but basically we're going to assume that b'sadevi ilan everyone agrees mo'alim bahem u'b'masha b'tochan. Okay, now let's figure this out. Bibor v'shovach. Now we have to understand. So if the Sadevi Ilan, they're all going to agree with Rabbi Yosi. So again, let's just review the Sadevi Ilan because that we're going to put aside. In a Sadevi Ilan, we're going to basically have both of them hold like Rabbi Yosi. So if it was full at the time with fruits or crops, of course you say consecrate the whole thing. That's according to everybody. And both Tanakam and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar in this braita. Again, it's not like the Tanakama. Well, it's not. There is no Tanakama by us. It's Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosi. So the Tanakama here and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar are going to agree with Rabbi Yosi that even if it was empty at the time, anything that grows from it is gidule hekdesh. Okay, that's fine. Now what we're left to understand is what's the machloket in the bor v'shovach, both in the empty case and in the case where they were full. Let's put the chart back up and let's follow inside. So first we're going to talk about, so the Gemara asks both questions, although only addresses them one by one. So what's the machloket between the Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon and Elazar if they're empty? And what's the machloket between them if they're full? Because empty, if you remember, everyone before agreed that mo'alim bahem ve'em mo'alim b'masha b'tochan. So why is Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon going to say even mo'alim b'masha b'tochan? Berekanim b'may plige. Berekanim plige beplukte de Rabbi Meir v'Rabbanan. Famous machloket, Rabbi Meir and the rabbis, we're going to see in a minute. Did Tanakama savar la ke Rabbanan de Amre? Ein adam makneh davar shelo ba'alo olam. You can't give over rights to something that's not in existence yet. So if I sell you a bore and there's no water in the bore, I don't sell you water which will come in the future that didn't exist right now. I mean, maybe the water exists in the world, but it doesn't exist in this bore. So just like I can't, if I would sell it, I can't sell you something, right? I would sell you the bore, the water that's not in there right now, right? That isn't in there, or the doves that aren't yet in the dovecote, right? That's a better example, right? How could I possibly give you the doves that haven't yet even come into the dovecote? So if I'm not makneh davar shelo ba'alo, if it would be sales, well, what is hekdesh if not giving over the rights to the temple? So I also don't give over rights to something that doesn't exist. And that's why if it was empty, there's no me'ila because it's not consecrated. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon savar ke Rabbi Meir. You might remember he has a very famous shita. Dama adam makneh davar shelo ba la'olam. Rabbi Meir holds that you can give over rights to something that's not yet in existence. And therefore, if I consecrate a bore, then it includes the water, even though the water's not here yet. Because eventually, or we'll talk about this in a minute, but eventually it'll get filled with water. And therefore, eventually the dovecote will get filled with doves. And therefore, as soon as they come in, automatically consecrated. That's Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon's position. Sorry, Rabbi Shimon. Yeah, I said it before, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar. Sorry. So Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. My mistake. So now we're going to have a side question on that, and then we're going to get back to the more troubling question, which is, what's the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar in the other case, where you consecrated them when the water was already there, and yet we say it's not consecrated. That's a weird position, especially if he holds it's consecrated when it was empty. Why, when it's full, is it not going to be consecrated? So we'll get there soon. But now we have one question on this before we move on. How can you say that Tanna Kama held like Rabbi Meir? Oh, I put this in the wrong spot. Yeah, this should be on the other side. Okay, I'll fix it after class. The question is really on the fact that Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Meir. So, Imur deshamat leila Rabbi Meir, kigon perot dekel da'avide da'atu. The fact that Rabbi Meir says Adam makneh davar shelo ba la'olam is not in any case. It's in a case like fruits of a palm tree, which are going to grow. So if I sell you a palm tree, it includes the rights to the fruits that haven't yet grown there because they're going to grow. But in a boar who says it's going to get filled with water, and in a shovach who says doves are going to come flying into my dovecote. What if they never show up? So I can't give you rights to something that's not necessarily going to happen, because even when Rabbi Meir has this position that you can give over rights to something that doesn't exist, he only says it in certain cases, and this doesn't seem to fit the criteria. To which I'm a Raba. Again, this is like a side question and response, because it doesn't really have to do with our main issue. It's just a question on the answer that we gave, or the explanation we brought. What we're basically going to do is give it this inukimta and say, it's a case where your courtyard is filled with water. Let's say when it rains, okay? Your courtyard gets filled with water and it's slanted downward toward your bore. So that your bore, okay, there's an assumption there will be rain in the world, right? Water will come into your courtyard at some point, and when it does, it's going to go right into your bore. So it is definitely going to happen, and therefore that could be a case like that. Okay, now, that means you must have two dovecotes, and you consecrate one of them, and the other one is full. And the assumption is that those doves will lay eggs, and the birds will have nowhere to go but to the next door dovecote, or something like that, where basically it's pretty clear that the overflow from this one will go into there, and it will overflow, and that's how we can understand. Okay, so we resolved that issue. Now we get back to this question, so this is a very strange machloket, because again, in light of what we saw before, if Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says, you can even if they were empty, why would he flip it when they're full and say that the water's not consecrated? It's very strange. So while it really didn't make sense when we talked about the Sadevi Ilan, it also doesn't really make sense about the boar and the shofach. So how can we explain this? I'm a Rava, last chart on the page. So Rava explains, what is it? Kigon shehikdish bor stam. Okay, you just said this boar is hekdesh. And you said boar. You didn't say the boar with the water in it. Now it's full of water, but you didn't say anything about the water. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, savar la'ka'avua. He holds like his father, Rabbi Shimon. De'amar danim din gavoa midin hedyot. His father said, we learn regular law. We learn laws of hekdesh, din gavoa, from laws of hedyot. Okay, this is an interesting question, whether or not we do this kind of thing, because this is a question to really think about our daf, which is the world of the Beit Hamikdash and consecration to God, is that the same? Is that like selling something? Right before I said makneh davar shelo ba la'olam, it's like in a sale, it would be the same for hekdesh. That was an assumption I made as if it's obvious, but it's not such an obvious assumption. So this is the root of the debate between Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and the Tanakama. Why? Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon says, din gavoa is like din hekdesh. It's just instead of selling it to a person, it's like you're selling it to the temple or giving it as a gift, you would say, right? Because you're not selling, you're not getting money back. But so how does that work? Okay, so let's fill in the blank. Here comes Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. It says, ma din hedyot, in the regular laws of sales, matze amar, the seller can say, bira zabin alach, maya lo zabin alach. If I sell you a pit, I can say, I sold you the pit. I didn't sell you the water. So, you go to take over the pit that I sold to you. And all of a sudden you see it's empty. And you say, what happened? It was full of water when I bought it. And I say, oh, I didn't say water. I said pit. So what that it was full of water at the time of the sale? I wasn't giving you the water. So therefore, same thing with hekdesh. Only the bore, not the water. And that's why he disagrees. Because he says, when I sell a bore, it doesn't necessarily mean that it includes the water. And therefore, because we learn it from din hedyot. So therefore, af din gavoa, bira akdish, ma'alo akdish. Likewise, in the laws of heaven, meaning relating to the temple, your bore will be hekdesh, but not the water. And then whether you read this or not, but let's just read it, even though some people take these words out, some parentheses, Tanakama would then hold, ein danim din gavoa midin hedyot, right? We don't learn these laws from there. And that the reason it's in parentheses, possibly you could read Tanakama some other way, but let's leave it at this. Now, I hope you thought of this question. If not, I won't get upset at you, but there's a big problem with what we just said. What did we say? Din hedyot, machar bor, lo machar etamayim, right? It doesn't include the water. You can take the water out and say, I wasn't selling you that. Gemara says, what? Din hedyot lo? V'hatnan, doesn't it say in our Mishna, how did we start class? And I won't blame you because, we got a little distracted, but, and good for you if you caught this, machar bor machar memav. The Mishnah says, it does include the water. So how can you possibly say it doesn't include the water? So we're now stuck because that was the only way we had to understand Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, as if, he took it the way we explained it, as if it was a given, right? So Rava had said, that's what it is. We learn one from the other, just like it's not included in a sale, it's not included in consecrated. That totally disagrees with the Mishnah. To which Raba pulls out a very good answer. Amar Rava, Manitin Yechida Ahi. Not everyone agrees with our Mishnah. And in fact, our Mishnah is a minority opinion. Okay, why Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, when he edited the Mishnah, decided to put in the minority opinion is a very good question. But we're going to prove that it's a minority opinion. With this will end today. Ditanya, machar bor lo machar memav. Rabbi Natan Omer, machar bor machar memav. Here, the topic of our Mishnah appears in a debate between two Tanaim, Tanakama, which is usually the mainstream opinion, the majority opinion, the rabbis, which is it doesn't include the water. So we now learn that what we started off with and thought it was a given, because that's what our Mishnah said, is actually not a given. And in fact, is a unique minority opinion of Rabbi Natan. And it's not the mainstream opinion. And therefore, we've resolved the problem with Rava's explanation of Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. Okay, that's the end, and we're already up to the next Mishnah. So now let's look at so I see, just before I end, I see you asked why not amend the braita? And the reason is because we wanted to explain Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. I mean, I guess you could have said switch the opinions, but already there's no reason, there's no motivation to switch opinions unless something really doesn't work. So could say, why would a Mishnah go by minority opinion? But sometimes Rabbi Yehuda Nasi actually does choose minority opinion. So it's not a crazy question. And that, right, and the braita is actually correct because there's a machloket, and there's no reason to think that there was a mistake in the braita because we're not actually amending anything. All we're saying is that our Mishnah is a unique opinion. And here we have a braita to prove it because it appears in the name of Rabbi Natan. So what we did today after dealing with, after we got off on the tangent of the siach and the sichon drasha and about people who stray from the way, I'm talking about people who leave divrei Torah, which was our topic for the beginning of the daf. Then we moved to this Mishnah and Meila. And the Mishnah and Meila distinguish basically, which I underline, between two cases. You were makdish a bore that was full of water, etc., and all the other things, or you were makdish it and later it got filled with water. And specifically in the second case, there's a machloket, but only specifically in the Sadevi Ilan and not anywhere else. So we had a side issue where that explanation of the Mishnah, which seems like the obvious explanation of the Mishnah, seemed to disagree or be contradicted by the language of Rebbi in this braita. So we basically just eventually translated the braita differently to make this work in together with the Mishnah. Then we brought this other braita, which we had to figure out because it didn't say which, since we already know this distinction between Sadeh Ilan and Bor and Shavach, and there's specifically a machloket in Sadeh and Ilan. We brought another case where there's a machloket in the same kind of case where it was empty and then got full. We thought that it must have been, right, Raba said it's Sadeh Ilan, and then it matches up perfectly with the other machloket we saw, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosi, and that would have worked really nicely. The problem is that in the beginning, they didn't quote the end of that braita, but the end of that braita makes absolutely no sense for Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Shimon all of a sudden does a switch. In fact, they even use it as the language of switched. He switched his opinion, right? He had a total flip opposite opinion there, which absolutely can't be explained according to Steilan. In which case, we had to say it's Bor and Shovach. In which case, if they have a machloket, it's definitely not the same machloket as Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosi, because Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosi agreed in a Bor of a Shovach. So we had to explain it had to do with this machloket of is Adam makneh davar shelo ba'al olam or not makneh davar shelo ba'al olam? And since it's not in existence, could it be consecrated or not? Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon said it could be, like Rabbi Meir, Tanakama held like the rabbis. We had a side question on that. Doesn't Rabbi Meir only say his stuff about Perot Dekel? But we said, oh no, that's, we can explain this case as being similar to that. And then that's what we call an ukimta. You have to explain it only in a particular manner, otherwise it doesn't really work. Then we're left to explain the end of that braita, which was this weird position of Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, to which we explained, it's just a matter of, do we learn laws of consecration from sales between people, or is it a totally different thing? And that's, again, an interesting concept to think about, right? Is it just like human relations just with God, or can you not compare a relationship with God or consecrated items to human laws? That it's totally different realm. That's the big machloket. We had this side question, but that doesn't match our Mishnah, to which we say, oh, don't worry, our Mishnah is a minority opinion, and that resolves it. And with that, we'll finish today's daf. Wishing everyone a good day.